Look, that's an important question, and the Australian government's really been unable to determine his status as either a prisoner of war or mercenary. And whilst we've had confirmation in the last 24 hours that Russia is indeed holding Oscar Jenkins, they haven't confirmed this particular issue. Now, of course, the Australian government has consistently said, right from the time of Oscar Jenkins' plight becoming known, that Jenkins should be treated as a prisoner of war. But we know that Russia has a track record of classifying foreign fighters in the Ukraine-Russia conflict as mercenaries and possibly subjecting them to criminal prosecution under Russian law.
And how serious could that be if he is deemed a mercenary as far as Russian law is concerned?
Well, in most of the cases that I'm aware of, convictions follow fairly swiftly. And there's a number of instances of reports where persons convicted of being a mercenary fighting in Ukraine against Russian forces have been subject to the death penalty. So it's quite a serious issue in terms of how this classification issue could be resolved with respect to Oscar Jenkins.
Yes, and what rights should he be afforded while he is in Russian custody? I mean, Russia is a party to the Geneva Convention, although it has, the Russian president has actually negated some aspects of it in recent times.
Well, the 1949 Geneva Convention dealing with prisoners of war is really the foundation international legal instrument negotiated post-World War II, dealing with precisely these types of situations. So if Jenkins is classified by the Russians as a prisoner of war, he will at a minimum be entitled to humane treatment. He will be given food, clothing, and some basic levels of protection whilst he remains in captivity until such time as the war ends, or until such time as he might be subject to a prisoner exchange agreement. And to that end, the Russians and the Ukrainians have engaged in a number of prisoner exchanges during the course of the conflict, most recently on New Year's Eve.
And are efforts to get him released complicated in a case where two countries don't exactly have friendly relations? And we know that things have soured between Russia and Australia over the downing of MH17 and the war in Ukraine.
Very much so. And to that end, Australia is not a party to this armed conflict. And so the provisions of the Geneva Convention apply directly to Ukraine and Russia. So even though an Australian national has been apparently caught up in this conflict, Australia doesn't necessarily have any rights under the Geneva Convention to directly engage on behalf of Oscar Jenkins. Australia is reminding the Russians of their obligations under international humanitarian law. So all Australia can really do at the moment is seek an update on his status and his welfare.
And of course, there has been talk of a possible prisoner swap as far as Oscar Jenkins is concerned. But is this possible? Is this likely? Because and also, does Australia have any bargaining chips on that front?
Not really. And I think to a degree, the suggestions made by some individuals that there should be a prisoner swap is a little far-fetched. And the Jenkins case is not really similar to other consular cases involving Australians who've been detained overseas in recent years, predominantly because we're in the middle of an armed conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and the governing legal framework, hopefully for Jenkins, if he's treated as a prisoner of war, is in fact the Geneva Conventions.
Okay, Professor Don Rothwell, really good to get your expertise on this. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.